Hello there, and welcome to this online lecture here in History Through Film. We're going to continue our unit on Eastern civilizations today by looking at one of the most important conflicts that occurs and is still occurring in the Middle East today. So what we're going to look at is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I want you to know right from the get-go that this is a complex issue. We can boil it down to land, but just to say that it's a fight over land is way too simplistic. And we want to understand both the background of this conflict as well as really what's been going on for about the last 50 years or so regarding these two groups of people. When I say the Israelis, I'm talking about the Jewish people that run Israel today. It's typically considered the only Jewish state in the world. And then you've got Palestinians in this region. Palestinians are Arabs. Arabs are mostly Muslims who also live in this same region of modern-day Israel or Palestine. Both of those names are going to be synonymous with the same region. So our learning target that goes with this today says, describe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including its background. And that's exactly what we're going to cover. Again, our three themes that we're covering here in the Middle East part of this unit. We had talked about Iran and the Iran hostage crisis, and we had watched the film Argo that goes with that. We're looking here at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and then we will end with something called Arab Spring, which we will look at next. But let's talk about the background to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. First of all, we have to go back in time. It says the modern problem starts here. It says Islam developed in the Middle East starting in 600 CE in the modern-day country of Saudi Arabia. And that's really important because the region that we're going to look at, if you look at this map here, we're talking just up in here, probably right up in where my cursor is. And so Islam's going to have a very strong influence on this region. By no means am I suggesting that Islam is the problem here. You could read that from this slide, but that's not what I'm saying. We have to look at this, that religion matters. Religion drives what people believe in, and that drives their culture and their behaviors. And so there's no doubt there's going to be Islam on one side of this. The other thing we can look at here is the modern Middle East emerged from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a huge Islamic empire that really started to crumble right around World War I in the 19-teens era. So a lot of countries are going to start developing their own identity after they split away from the Ottoman Empire. So what we see here is everything in red and pink is once what was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Again, the region we're looking at is going to be right in here. And so really at the heart of what once used to be the Ottoman Empire. Now, to really kick this off, we have to talk about something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And really what this was is it was an attempt by European countries to dominate other parts of the world so that they could benefit from it. Britain and France are notorious for this, especially the people of Great Britain have colonized more land around the globe than any other country. So the Sykes-Picot Agreement was an agreement that involved both Britain and France. And what this agreement did is it set the borders of some of the modern-day countries today. But when they set these borders, they never considered the ethnicity, language, or religion of the people in those territories when determining those boundaries. I mean, this would be like somebody coming in today and naturally or unnaturally combining Vikings and Packers fans. You want to consider who the people are before you set up these boundaries, but that's typically not what the British and the French did. They were in these regions really to try to make as much money and grab as many resources as they could. So when did this happen? Well, the agreement started in November of 1915, and it's all about imperialism, the big why there. We've talked about imperialism a couple of different times. Really, imperialism is when a stronger country tries to dominate a weaker country socially, politically, or economically. And that's exactly what the British and the French were trying to do, is they were trying to move in and take goods, resources, and even labor in these different regions, including the Middle East, so they could benefit them. So in the end, England and France wanted more money and more power. Again, they moved in there. They weren't like thinking, hey, let's improve the lives of the Middle Easterners. It was the opposite. They said, how do we improve the lives for the British? How do we improve the lives for the French? What can we take from these regions that will benefit us? Imperialism is a pretty negative thing. It can lead to wars, it can lead to famines, it can lead to revolutions. It's had some pretty negative consequences across history. So when we talk about the background of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we have to talk about the people that were there that really stirred up a hornet's nest that made this worse. So if we look at this a little further, Britain controlled Jordan. Britain's going to control Iraq. You've got France that controlled Turkey and Syria and Lebanon. The area of Palestine, which is also known as Israel, was controlled by Russia up until their 1917 revolution. So why am I telling you this? What's the purpose of really telling you who controlled these countries? Well, the Middle Eastern countries no longer had autonomy or control over themselves. Think about that. You've got somebody else with a different language, maybe even a different religion, who's telling you how to live. And in that process, they're taking away stuff from your country. That's going to create animosity. It's going to create hatred. It's going to create a lot of different problems when they create these type of borders. So long before Israel and Palestine fight each other, which is going to be the next phase of this story, you've got other countries that are moving in that are really, again, I'm going to use that phrase, stirring up the hornet's nest, because they're really making things worse while they're trying to improve lives for themselves. Here's just another map. This gives you another look at different countries. I don't know why they spelled Egypt with an A, but we'll ignore that. Basically what you see is independent countries here are in this yellowish country, but you've got countries controlled by the British, countries controlled by the French, you've even got countries controlled by the Italians. So there are lots of countries that were practicing imperialism in the early 1900s. So that's what this map is representing here. Now, our two sides of today's story are going to be the Palestinians and the Israelis. So the Palestinians, they're Arab nationalists. Mostly they are Muslims who have lived in this area known as Palestine. Some of their families have lived there for hundreds of years. So what did they want? They wanted an independent Arab state from Syria in the north down to Yemen in the south. They wanted their own country. And you can't blame them. I mean, a lot of people in the world have wanted similar things. So they wanted their own country that, represented them. On the Jewish side, you have Jewish nationalists that wanted their own country. They wanted an independent state of Israel in the same region. They wanted the same Palestinian land. They wanted something called Zionism. They wanted to rebuild a Jewish state in the ancient Jewish homeland. So they wanted the land. They thought they were entitled to it. The Palestinians, or the Arab nationalists, they wanted the land. They thought they were entitled to it. And you want to believe, hey, can we just cut it in half? Can we find some type of peaceful compromise where each side gets the land that they want? Problem is, land is not equal. If I give you a piece of land and I give another person a piece of land, chances are you're going to have differences. One might have better access to water. One might have better resources. One might have more historical significance. So land is never equal. So these two groups, the Israelis and the Palestinians, they basically go to war against each other. It's called the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict really started on May 14th, 1948 with the birth of Israel. Long story short, the UN had proposed a resolution to divide this property between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but the Israelis, once the British mandate, once the British control expired, because Britain had controlled this territory, once that expired on May 14th, they just took it. Israel said, this is ours. We are starting our country known as Israel. Well, you can imagine the Palestinians, they were horrified. That date is known as the catastrophe, or the Arabic word Nakba, to the Palestinians. They were extremely upset because Israel declared itself a country without, acknowledging that somebody else wanted that land too. Well, the very next day, 5 neighboring Arab countries declared war on Israel. And it was, in a way, it's almost still been going on. There's been conflict ever since 1948. These neighboring Arab countries that wanted some of that land or were sympathetic to the people that wanted that land, they refuse to acknowledge Israel's right to exist, and they are willing to fight Israel for it and have been fighting Israel for it ever since. So when Israel took this land in 1948, which they thought they were entitled to, after all, it's the land that the ancient Israelites or Canaanites, however you want to call them, the Hebrew people, they were promised this piece of land in the Bible. And they've basically had some type of property there ever since. So that's why they think they're entitled to it. But I told you, the Palestinians, they've lived there too. And they think they're entitled to this land as well. Here's just a newspaper article from the New York Times, the date afterwards when they declared it's a Zionist proclaimed new state of Israel. Truman recognizes it and hopes for peace. And then Tel Aviv, which is an important city in Israel, is bombed and Egypt orders invasion. So you can see the conflict started right away. Ever since then, there has been violence in this region. There'll be a couple years that go by where there's peace, and then it'll start up again. You'll see it on the news. Sometimes it's simple as people throwing rocks, but sometimes they're launching rockets at each other. So this slide is a really quick overview of some of that violence. I'm going to go through it really quick. So in 1980s, the PLO, known as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, became the main opposition to the state of Israel. So the PLO was definitely attempting to try to get Israel to give up their land or even attack Israel. So violence between the Israelis and the Palestinians killed 6,000 plus people from 2000 to 2005. Eventually, Israel is going to withdraw from a place called the Gaza Strip, and I'm going to show you where this is on a map, in 2005 in good faith, basically saying, here, we're going to give you this property. But it's such a small piece of property that the Palestinians were never going to be happy with it. That'd be like the United States giving away like Delaware. It's just not enough property to appease a group of people who wants that land. Another group of people in this region known as Hamas, it's a radical Islamic group. They won an election in 2006 and they consolidated their power in Gaza. And you can see this here, their charter states, which is kind of like their main document. It says it strives to raise the banner of Allah over every inch of Palestine, which is basically saying they're Muslims and they want to control all of Palestine because they think they have a right to it as well. They conducted rocket attacks against Israel. Israel then attacks Gaza, hoping to crush Hamas. Bottom line is there's been a lot of violence between these two groups of people. You might recognize this guy. We're doing an assignment in class on Jonathan Netanyahu. He's definitely involved. So if you've done that assignment, you should kind of know his story a little bit. And when you look at this, in 1946, prior to Israel taking this land, you can see most of it belonged to the Palestinians. There was very little Jewish land in here. Well, this was the plan that the UN presented, that Israel would get everything in white and Palestine would get everything in green. It's kind of 50-50, but like I told you, land is not, it's not equal. Just because you get one piece of property doesn't mean it's going to be as good as the other piece that's promised to somebody else. So the UN proposed this, it was rejected, and Israel then took over basically everything. And they've continued to exert their dominance. Here we are in 2013. You can see that Israel pretty much controls this whole property. The Palestinians, many of them are still living there. They want it. They want control. This is the Gaza Strip right here. So this is the piece that Israel gave away. You can see it's very, very small. So bottom line is, ever since 1948, these two sides have been fighting over for land. Now, it's way more complicated than that, and I told you that. We can say it's a fight over land, but that ignores a lot of the important background information. So there's no compromise. There's no end to this in sight. When you watch the news and they talk about peace in the Middle East, this is typically what they're talking about. And I don't know that in your lifetime or my lifetime we're going to see a resolution to this. I don't know that we're going to see any agreement that gives land back to the Palestinians where they're happy with. The Jews want it, the Israelis want it, the Palestinian Arabs, the Muslims want it, and they're going to keep fighting over it until one of them is truly happy, namely the Palestinians. If that didn't make sense to you, because this is a very, very complex issue, this video will help sum it up for you. I'm going to put the link right here at the bottom so you can click on it and watch it. It's approximately 6 minutes long. It's very easy to follow, and I will warn you, it is from the Jewish perspective. Just be aware of that. But it helps kind of make you understand this conflict a little bit deeper. So I highly recommend that you watch that to understand this. But this is something that's going to go on and on and on. Okay, so that's where we're going to end here today. There we have our learning target. It says describe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, including its background. So hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.